Shalom and welcome back. We're now going to be continuing our lesson in Yochanan. In this segment, we're going to be focusing on the continuation of what happened. Nicodemus at the point had come to Mashiach Yehoshua and was basically being talked to by Mashiach Yehoshua that here he is a sage, Nicodemus, in the Sanhedrin, and here he is, he's in a position of teaching and helping the people to know the Torah, the laws, and yet he was very much lacking the true understanding of the heart and soul of how is it that we were to understand what the Torah really teaches and the grasping the concepts of the spiritual principles of growth and maturity in the faith. And that Nicodemus didn't understand this. He didn't know why this was true, or if this was true, or how this was true. So John, as we see in chapter 3, and as we begin, continue on in verse 19, he says, "And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world. Men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil." We know the Torah says in Bereshit that God calls Hoshech darkness, and that Hoshech, we learn from the Torah, is called evil. Because the Bible says God saw the Or, the light, and he called the Or day. But the darkness, Hoshech, he called Laila, night. And God said when he saw the light, he says, Ki tov, for it was good. And from that very statement of saying Ki tov, tells us and teaches us that Hoshech is the opposite of Or. Not just in literal form, where we can say, okay, literally, yes, darkness is the opposite of light. But the fact that since light is tov, good, Hoshech then must be Ra, evil. And that, as he says in this very thing, that anyone who practices evil hates Or, light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. And you don't have to excuse him. They think you can stay here. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they may be done in God. Notice this, the thing that we see all throughout Mashiach Yehoshua's teachings, which is so paramount, which I don't know why there's such a constant destructive teaching of what it means to follow Mashiach Yehoshua, is the Torah is very clear. The Brit Chadashah makes it very clear that coming to believe in Mashiach Yehoshua also means coming and clarifying the deeds of our life. Changing any evil we've done and doing teshuvah, repenting. What's the evil? Maybe the evil was eating unkosher food. Maybe the evil that's being done in your life is lying. There's a lot of things that we could go on and on. One of the biggest things we have to understand is, the Torah wasn't given in a day, and there's a reason for that. And that's because the Torah is to, as we go through the process of learning it, as we go through the process of learning to understand it, learning to grasp it, we are being whittled through a sheath, right? And in Hebrew, they call it a reshet, right? So you take the reshet, this shifting mechanism that's like a wire sheath, as they call it, reshet. I'm trying to, not a sheath, but a wire. Trying to think how to word it. A net, in a sense. All right, it's got small holes, so that basically the big stuff is what stays on top, and the smaller stuff gets shifted through. God wants us to see everything in our life. He wants us to know about everything in our life, about what we're doing wrong. And there's so many areas of our life, so many facets of life. You're married, maybe it's marriage issues, relationship issues, raising children issues, a lot of these things. Our life is in itself a constant growing process. It's a constant growing process. Okay? I'll give you an example. Like, I remember in the earlier days when I was learning in the Torah and stuff, that I started to wear a kippah, like most people do. You get caught up in watching other people doing it who are Jewish, and you say, oh, it's Jewish, so I'll do it. And then there goes into the process of the challenges, right? And, for the longest time, when I wore it in Israel, I got to a point, I got sick of wearing a kippah. And the reason why I got sick of it was because my understanding was it was rabbinic, okay? And what I understood as rabbinic, and I'll explain this more because a lot of people might be saying, what does that mean? I don't understand this. Oh, what's this thing? Or is this religious thing? Or is this some weird Jewish thing? Whatever. Oh, this religious thing or whatever. What I understand when I was going and digging into understanding it was the context of rabbinic, when it was being understood and being researched and studied by myself, meant that it wasn't really in the Bible, okay? And a lot of things the rabbis would do that they would call a rabbinic edict or rabbinic redaction or rabbinic tikkun, okay? I started to struggle, because I was like, I want to make sure I'm doing what the Torah says. I have no desire to be under the teachings of just men making up their own rules and stuff. And so I had my own struggles, right? I did. And then there was a time where I sat there and I went away from that direction. And I took the kippah off. And honestly, it wasn't very long. Because I wore it for years and years and years. I mean, I wore a kippah for I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years, something like that. And then I took the kippah off. And then I finally was studying the Torah and realized that we are to wear head covering. And when I saw that, there began the research of, well, what is it? What is the head covering? What does the Torah say? What does the Torah teach? What is the Torah saying that we're to do? And eventually I came to an understanding. And when I came to understanding all of the things I had in my head, all the feelings that I went through, all the stuff that I was going through and stuff, one of the biggest things that I realized was I saw that my struggle in the beginning was I didn't like the fact of feeling under a man's rules, because anything that the Torah says we're to do and to follow and keep is a whole different dynamic function, because it's about following God, it's about obeying what God says, it's about learning to follow the structure that God's given us. And that there's always pictures and understandings and things involved in why God tells us to do something. But when men are involved, it falls dead. I'll give you an example for the Al Natilat Yadayim, washing your hands before you eat. I remember physically doing this for a while when I was in Israel. And then I got to the point of realizing what Mashiach Yehoshua said. I didn't fully grasp and understand what he meant, what was being revealed and what was being spoken of as the fullness. But I knew when I was reading what Mashiach Yehoshua said that Mashiach Yehoshua keeps Torah, period. And I will honestly tell you that without knowing exactly why he said what he said, I walked away from Al Natilat Yadayim because I didn't see this in the Torah. Okay? Now, understand this stuff. This is a very important thing to understand. Not seeing something in the Torah doesn't necessarily mean, and this is important to understand this, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist at times when we say this. Sometimes when we say, I don't see this in the Torah, it's because we haven't searched enough to really understand whether it's there or not. When I really got into hearing Mashiach Yehoshua's words first, and I realized, okay, Mashiach Yehoshua, he wasn't washing his hands. So there's something to this. And so I stopped washing my hands, and as I delve in, later came the understanding. And that later understanding that I understood from the Torah was the fact of washing the hands was created as a false belief, but based upon a messed up ideology of interpretation of the Torah. For example, the Torah says that the Kohanim were to wash their hands before they would enter in the temple service. Okay? Now, does the Torah mean that multiple things can be learned as halachot from things that are spoken of in the Torah? The simple answer is yes, absolutely. The complex answer is it depends. And that is the complex part. It depends. First and foremost is, what was the reason for the Kohanim washing their hands? Okay? Well, the Kohanim had to wash their hands and their feet because they have a requirement that before they present any sin sacrifice or any offering on behalf of Bnei Israel, they have to keep their life pure. They have to make sure that their walk is correct because they're helping cause teshuvah to exist for a Jew who is coming and is needing help with their life. You know, if a Jew came to the temple and he brought a korban, and the korban was tameh, the Kohen would sit there and he would say, Achi, Hashem will not accept this because the Torah says that it must be tahor. You need to see there's something that you're not doing right in your heart. Only when you come to the temple and when a sacrifice is tahor, it's because you have done rightful teshuvah, and that the area by which you're seeking to do teshuvah in has been properly addressed, both on a physical change as well as in your heart. And that's the purpose of the Kohen, is to help encourage the Jew to see that God doesn't accept an offering just because it's offered. He accepts only the offerings that are tahor. And only the offerings that are tahor are they acceptable. That's why we know that even during Yom Kippur, that if the goat was not being accepted, that the crimson red thread would not change color, and that the people would realize that there was no acceptance of that goat because the people's sins were not being washed away because the people were not really doing teshuvah. And this is the thing we find with the Kohanim, that when the Kohanim are encouraging a Jew, that the Torah requires that they wash their hands, which is a position of washing their actions, and washing their feet, which is a position of washing the way they function and walk, okay? And that by doing those things, by keeping their hands and feet washed, then they could present the actual sacrifice because their heart and their actions are in the right place. So what did the sages do? They made an incorrect halacha. They made a halacha thinking that this was a Torah commandment that applied also to before you ate food. And so they made this halacha out of it. Now, here's the funny thing about it is, why didn't they include washing the feet as well? Because if you notice, the halacha only talks about washing of the hands, okay? Which goes to show you that somebody seriously made a big erroneous error. They only even tried to apply one aspect of it, which either way, the aspects of that halacha could never be made from the Torah. And when I say halacha made from the Torah, I'm not saying that they're making rules. I'm saying that what it is they're taking from the Torah and they're realizing that this is a commandment, that this is a physical commandment of what you're to do and how you're to function. And that happens when you live in a time period, as every time period has, where things have to be restored. You know, if you were to look back at all of history, there was an up and down in generations of understanding of Torah. There was a time period where people thought polygamy was permissible, and then there was a time period where people realized polygamy wasn't permissible. And then a new generation pops up, and they get mixed up because why? Because something that was supposed to be preserved, which is saying that you're not allowed to marry more than just one woman's it, it's all you're allowed to marry, they get screwed up with the ideology of thinking they can have multiple marriages. They can marry if they're divorced, they can marry if they're this way. A lot of these ideologies that gets really, mixed up in all of these things. And so what happens is the people get really confused as each generation moves back and forth within these areas of struggle, where one generation is losing the Torah because they weren't observing it, and another generation has to reestablish the Torah because of what was lost. So when going and sitting down, as the people had to, because you got to think about it, during the time of the Maccabean revolt, many Jews have been doing a big avodah zarah, a big avera. They were sinning. They weren't keeping the Torah like they ought to, and there was a big teshuvah that was needed to be done, and a big change that needed to exist, and that required a lot of halachots of the Torah to be examined and seen. We see this with Ezra, how he talks about how he, during the time period, says how the people dwelled in a sukkah and how they had to search out in the Torah to find how to build the sukkah. And when he found how to build the sukkah, he was able to say, okay, this is how we're going to build the sukkah, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's to be done. And finding all of the things that the Torah said in relationship to Sukkot and how to make a sukkah and how to build a sukkah, they were able to restore Sukkot properly. So here we have people that did not know the Torah properly, and they made erroneous errors, and this error that was made was the creation of Al Natilat Yadayim, the commandment that was not a commandment, but was thought to be a commandment. And this is why we find that Mashiach Yehoshua, when he refused to let himself wash his hands before eating the food, that he caused purposefully the people to question, why are you doing this? And then when we see the Talmudim did the exact same thing when they followed what Mashiach Yehoshua did, they realized that, this was something that was really focusing upon their attention to question, what is going on here? Why are you doing this? From their standpoint of view, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were looking at these actions done by Yehoshua Mashiach as rebellion, because they viewed it as a halacha of Torah, right? But when you looked at the heart of everything and listened carefully to what was being said, you realize it wasn't a halacha from the Torah. It was actually a made-up law we call the commandment of men. This is what the Brit Hadashah makes it very clear by Yitzchak, that these are called the traditions of men, which means they're false interpretations of the Torah. And when you have false interpretations of the Torah, you have a wrong direction of how you look at life. You have a wrong direction of how you think. Think about this and stuff. What was the purpose of thinking that washing hands was necessary in order to eat food? And if you ate food without washing hands, the food became tamei. You see, this is the attitude that lost so much, because the point was, if you were to think that if I didn't wash my hands, the food was tamei, right? The question goes to say is, how could the food become tamei by you not washing your hands? Okay? The Torah does not teach us this. The Torah does not teach us that our hands have to be washed in order to eat, because if not, we're tamei. If you were tamei, just period, like you touched the pig and you became tamei, you'd have to immerse. But the Torah doesn't even forbid us from eating regular food in the status of tumah. It only forbids you from eating kosher, holy food that's in the temple, Because remember, the same kashrut that you have in your daily life is the same kashrut that exists in the temple. The only difference is the temple food that would be used for sacrifices and offerings and stuff, that food, you had to be in a state of tahorot, because it's a point of showing us that there's an elevation, there's a change, there's a growth in spirituality, and it's the change of our life, our mind, our mentality, our thinking, when we draw near to God and when we draw near to His ways. That's why the Bible talks about the korbanot as being kadosh, as being set apart, as being eaten in a status of tahorot, because the picture of it is that our desire is to be tahor. Our desire, the goal of our life is to be tahor. So what would happen if a person didn't eat with washed hands? Well, you see, the way the Torah works is it's supposed to be, where we understand this is, if you're doing something and you sin, right? Then the point should be whatever you did is what caused the sin, right? So, for example, the Torah says, don't touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's what the Torah was teaching us in the Garden of Eden, that God commanded Adam, saying, do not touch it, don't eat of the fruit, right? So, number one, we know from the literal statement of what the Torah says, it says, lo tuchal, you should not eat, right? Well, eating of the fruit is the prohibition, right? So, if eating of the fruit is the prohibition, what would you want that you would think would be the most logical thing from the Torah's perspective? What would you want the person to do in order to stay away from eating it? You command him not to touch it, right? Because why? Because if you touch it, touching it then plays with the idea of eating it, okay? Because if you can touch it and grab it, right? What's the next final step? Would be physically eating it, okay? Well, when you look at washing your hands, and you look at the issue of al natilat yadayim, the whole issue of washing your hands, well, what does not washing your hands do? It doesn't create that barrier that protects you from committing a transgression, because you can eat unholy food that's kosher in a state of tumah. Okay, so if you had touched something that was dead, like a rat or whatever and stuff, and you have to immerse before evening and stuff, well, what, are you going to not eat any food and stuff like that? That you're permitted to eat food. Matter of fact, you're touching it doesn't even transmit tumah. The Torah says that only a dead person or a person who's nidah, she or the dead person transmits tumah. So you can't even transmit tumah when you've touched a dead, unclean animal, right? You just become tameh, but you don't transmit tumah. And so the thing that the Torah says here in this thing is the fact of the logic doesn't fit. If a person is touching something, right, that makes him tameh, and yet he cannot transmit the tumah to a kosher animal that is used for just regular eating, then what is the avera? You understand this? There is none. There is no avera for washing of the hands, because the washing of the hands doesn't even rid of yourself of tumah. So there's no logic there, right? Whereas the kohanim, the washing of the hands is to get them prepared for the service of the tabernacle, so that when they wash their actions and they wash the way they function, when they go to present an offering, they can do it in a tahor state, and they can do it in the state that's necessary for a proper state of receiving and the helping of a person to teshuvah can be accomplished in the tabernacle. This is one of the things why we see from the Torah that when we dig deeper into things, we'll find the answers. And also, we can learn from everything Mashiach Yehoshua teaches us, okay? That even times we may not grasp and understand why he said what he said and why it's true in the sense, but not that we can't say, oh, okay, he said this is bad. You know, we may not understand why is it bad. What is it about it? Why did he say no? If we just accept and realize that from the things that he says at times, we can follow it. Because when we go through the process of learning, oh, that's why we don't do this thing. I get it now. this is a part of the learning process. We learn this in the Torah. It's one of the big things in the Torah. There are times you're told to do halachos. You won't even fully understand why you're doing it. It might take you 15 years to figure out, oh, this is why we do the halakha. Okay? And this is a part of what we learn. Mashiach Yehoshua teaches us in the Brit Chadashah's words that he spoke to us through his word, teaches us that he is the perfect knowledge of the Torah. And this is why it's so important for us to embrace and understand this. So when we look at the issues of seeing what he says, he who does the truth comes to the light, but his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. That's why we know that the Torah, the light of the Torah, is what reveals to us. Nobody can sit there and say, oh, yes, we don't have to keep the Torah anymore. The Torah is done away with. Half of the laws we can throw away and stuff. A lot of people banter, a lot of people fight over the issues of the Torah. Oh, but you have the sacrifices, you have the offerings and stuff. But they forget to literally put themselves in the logic of thinking, wait a second here, Daniel wasn't sinning because he lived in a time when there was no temple. Matter of fact, Esther and Mordechai, they weren't sinning because they didn't live in a time when there was a temple. Matter of fact, if we go throughout the logic of what the Bible shows us, it's very clear that the temple, only when it was standing, only in the time when God allowed these things to be about and be used, was there a commandment that if you had committed a certain transgression, you're required to go bring a sin sacrifice. And there were only certain sacrifices for sin under certain laws. Not every single thing required you to bring a sacrifice for sin. Okay? Like if you lied to someone, it didn't require you to physically go and bring an actual physical lamb to the actual temple for a sacrifice. Matter of fact, that's what we find in the Yom Kippur offering, that becomes the offering that covers all. That's why even Paul tells us and stuff that there is a sacrifice for all sin. And that's the Yom Kippur offering. And that's why we find that the Yom Kippur offering, the Bible teaches us that the Yom Kippur offering is so important because it encompasses all of the things that have been done throughout the year. Lying, many of this, such violations, eating unkosher food, stuff like that, which don't require physical going to the actual temple to bring an offering. Matter of fact, the only things that required going to the temple specifically to bring an offering for sin were severe laws that the punishment was death, like violating Shabbat. Okay? So we have to realize and understand that there's a logic and a format to the fact of why and some things were done and why they were brought and what they were brought for. So he says, after these things, Yehoshua and his Talmidim came into the land of Yehuda, and they remained there with them and did immersion. So they were helping people do teshuvah, right? So teshuvah was a big portion of the teachings that we find that both Yochanan and Mashiach Yehoshua did together teaching, which is exactly what we see in the Torah with Moshe and with Aaron. They went together and they did teachings of teshuvah. They were telling the people to repent, to turn away from the sins, to turn away from the transgressions, and to turn back and follow the commandments, right? So why would that teaching change in any way, shape, or form? This is why it's just erroneously illogical. There is no change in what he taught. That's why you can go at the end of Luke, and the last thing that Luke says in his epistle and stuff is, he says, go and preach the repentance to all nations. And that is the very fact of telling the people that, teshuvah, repenting, doing what's right, which means keeping the commandments, is exactly the very sole goal of what Mashiach Yehoshua taught, and even commanded even after the resurrection, saying, and that repentance and remission of sin should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning in Jerusalem. And that's Luke chapter 24, verse 47. So the same thing is taught from the beginning as well as it taught at the end and at the beginning of the time period of the Talmidim, where after Mashiach Yehoshua raised and ascended back into heaven, that the Talmidim, all they preached was repenting and doing teshuvah and keeping the commandments. All right? So it says, Now, Yochanan was immersing in Anon near Shilim because there was much water there, and they came and were immersed. For Yochanan had not yet been thrown into prison. Then there arose a dispute between some of Yochanan's Talmidim and the Jews about purification. And they came to Yochanan and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you have testified, behold, he is immersing, and all are coming to him. Well, the issue obviously is the fact of what? They thought Mashiach Yehoshua was physically immersing people. That was being said and spoken of because of the way people were viewing what they were hearing, not based upon what really was taking place. And of course, the issue was Mashiach Yehoshua going to physically immerse anybody? No. Was the Messiah supposed to immerse anybody? No. And that's exactly why we learn that this wasn't really what happened. He was not immersing anybody. Rather, it was the Talmidim that were immersing, and they're immersing people to do teshuvah, right? So it says, Yochanan answered and said, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given to him from heaven. So they were struggling with the fact of, why is it that the Talmidim of Yehoshua are immersing when here Yochanan was immersing? What is this? Because their thinking was, I thought it was just supposed to be Yochanan who was supposed to be calling people to do teshuvah and immersing. And so Yochanan goes to explain to them that the reason why this teshuvah is being done by the Talmidim, right, is because it's the time for Mashiach Yehoshua to rise up and to be seen properly and to be understood, the things that were being spoken of in the prophets, that this would happen, that the Mashiach, when he would come, that these things would happen, right? So he says here, you yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Mashiach, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. But the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is fulfilled. So Yochanan was basically pointing out the fact that Yehoshua is the actual Mashiach. And that he was rejoicing because people were now coming to him, and that his basic ministry of leading people to believe in Mashiach and leading people to go and follow Mashiach is now being fulfilled. So he says, he must increase, but I must decrease. He who comes from above is above all, and he who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all, and that he has seen and heard, that he testifies, and no one receives his testimony. He who has received his testimony, has certified that God is true. So he's basically saying that everything that Mashiach Yehoshua says, those who are really believing what Mashiach Yehoshua said are proving that God's words are being manifested, and that the manifestation of God's words are being proven through the change in the action of the people that God's done in these different people's hearts to become changed and to be morphed into the way that they are to be walking in. He says, for he whom God has sent speaks the words of God. For God does not give the Spirit by measure. So he's pointing out, saying, you have to understand this. Whoever is following God, God also will pour out a Spirit in those directions and will encourage the growth of the kingdom and will encourage the growth of the people to continually walking in the truth. And that's why Yochanan wasn't afraid. He wasn't worried the fact that Mashiach Yehoshua's fame was becoming elevated, that people were starting to hear about Mashiach Yehoshua more and more and more. He says, the Father loves the Son and has given all things unto his hand. He who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son, Son, shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. So you see, Yochanan was pointing out very carefully and very clearly that Mashiach Yeshua is the Son of God, period. And that was so important for the people to realize, because what does it mean to be a son? To be a son of God means you believe in keeping the commandments, you believe in keeping the statutes, you walk in them, you're seeking to follow God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Well, what does it mean to be the Son of God? It's a whole different ballgame. It means to be the perfect, absolute perfection of the Torah. And that's why it's so important for us to follow Jesus, because he is the perfect, absolute perfection of the Torah. He is the way, period. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Yehoshua made and immersed more disciples than Yochanan, though Yehoshua himself did not immerse, but his disciples did. Remember that point we talked about earlier? He left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of the ground of Yaakov, and gave his son to Joseph. Now Yaakov's well was there, and Yehoshua, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat by thus the well. It was about the 6th hour. So we know that the time period that it was, okay, since the 6th hour would have to be considered noon time, right? We're talking the heat of the day, right? So he says, a woman of Samaria came to draw water, and Yehoshua said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Now, interesting enough, the well here that's being spoken of, okay, we learn from the Torah that a well that comes from a spring, its waters are pure, okay? And that's because what happens is the depths of the earth have purified the waters as it's moved upward throughout the whole layers and layers of different rock sediments in different areas, whether it's through the sand, the charcoal layers and stuff. All the water's been purified. Is drinkable. It says, for his Talmudim had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, okay, so here's a woman who's not Jewish, she's a Samaritan, asking to drink from me, a Samaritan woman. For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. All right? So what happened? Well, Samaritans were actually a group of people who at one time had converted and came to the faith of Moshe. However, they had been so greatly apostatized because of their actions that the Jews looked at them with frustration and animosity because they created their own belief system. They had their own temple. They had their own place that they believe was the place where they were to bring their sacrifices to. They didn't go to the actual physical temple. And so there was a great apostasy that took place. And so here's a woman who knows that this animosity is highly, greatly, acted upon in Israel. And she's shocked that here's this Jew asking her for some water. Yehoshua answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, give me to drink, you would be asking him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then are you going to get this living water? Now, the context of, remember this is a very interesting thing, because the word Mayim Chaim is the word that's used for water that's sustainable, right? Water that has life in it, okay? And drinking water is Mayim Chaim, but also Mayim Chaim to be considered, oceanic water or lake water or rainwater. Okay, so Maim Chaim has different forms. So it's when we see what's being said here, and he's talking about basically the way she hears it. He says in the formality of what she would have understood, which she's thinking literally, oh, you want something to drink, right? And he goes and says, well, actually, if you knew, right, who was talking, he says you would be asking him for Maim Chaim, right? And she says, what, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself? Now, why does she make that statement? Are you greater than our father Jacob? Well, Jacob, okay, as we know in the Torah, that Yaakov, he's spoken of in the book of Bereshit, that when he went up to get for a wife, because he had to flee from Esau, that he went to Lavan's well, right? And when he went to Lavan's well, the Bible tells us that it took literally men, multiple men, to take this big stone and to push it off of the opening of the well in order for anybody to gather water out of the well, period. Well, when Yaakov was there and he had been fleeing from Esau this whole time period, and he finds that these guys are really, bad people who have been trying to pretend that this is the well they drink from, he goes and he basically opens the well himself. So God gives him supernatural strength, and he pushes open the well by himself, and he waters the flock of Lavan and gives the water to Rachel for the actual flocks to drink. So she's asking this question, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as the well of his sons and his livestock? So Yehoshua answered and said to her, whosoever drinks of this well will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. And the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. Now notice this. His whole point that he brings up to her is about, do you want to know the truth? Do you want to know the Torah? Do you want to know righteousness? Do you want to know something that's never going to be something where you're going to feel unsatisfied? Where when you keep the Torah, you're always going to feel the satisfaction of the Torah. You're never going to feel a gaping hole in your chest. You're not going to feel these emotional lacks in your life. You're not going to feel this flooded lacking of like, I'm missing something, okay? And immediately when she's asking, she says, I want to know the Torah. I want to know what is the truth. I want to know. What's the first thing Mashiach Yehoshua says to her? Go and call your husband and come here. Well, why did he say go and call your husband and come here? Well, here's the thing. In the Torah law, the Torah commands that a man is to respect the husband of another man's wife. And that respecting the husband means you talk to the husband about keeping the Torah, right? And he ultimately can talk to the wife and say, no, what he's saying is true, right? And that's because why? Because what did Hasatan do in the garden? He went behind Adam's back and spoke to Chava to try to get Chava to turn away from Adam, right? And Mashiach Yehoshua teaches us that that's the way the Torah works is it works the opposite of what Hasatan did. You draw Adam and you get Adam to encourage Chava, right? So he says, go and call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Yehoshua said to her, you have well said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. So notice this. He says, the one that you have is not your husband. So what happened to the 5 guys? Okay, that's something that you have to think about here. And then the other issue is and stuff is, she's been married 5 different times, and now she has somebody who she's been with that's not even her husband. Okay? So he says here, the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Now, why did she say this, I perceive you to be a prophet? It's a very special statement to think about. Because when we look at that very statement, we have to understand the fact of, out of all the things she could have said many, many things. But why does she think that all of a sudden her first words come in her mouth, I perceive you to be a prophet? And the simple answer is because he was saying things to her that was going to cause her to think about what she's done in her life and to make her think about doing teshuvah. And he spoke with the absolute accuracy of knowing exactly what was going on in her life. That's why she says, I perceive you to be a prophet. How could you have known that I've had 5 husbands? And the man that I'm with right now is not my husband. Right? So he says, the woman said to him, I perceive you to be a prophet. He says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. Yoshua said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. What does that mean? You see, if you take that literal, it's almost like you're thinking Yehoshua was wanting to do away with the temple, as if like the temple had no significant purpose for the new covenant, as if the temple was not a part of life anymore, like as if it was just to be washed out and blotted out and stuff. That's a lot of people perceive this to be. That's not what he was saying here. He wasn't trying to blot out or trying to make any statement as if like the temple is just going to be blotted out and that's the goal of the new covenant, is just to destroy everything and destroy the laws and get rid of the laws and stuff. That's not what he was saying, okay? He was talking about this very thing. We have to listen carefully what he says here. He says, you worship that what you do not know, and we know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. What did it mean to worship it in spirit and in truth? You see? Use my camera here for a second. What did it mean to worship in spirit and in truth? Right? Because you see, the point here that we find from what the Torah is saying here, what the Brit Chadash is talking about, is worshiping in spirit and truth means obeying. Okay? The point of all things is obedience. That's the goal of the Torah, is obedience. It's not sacrifices, it's not burnt offerings. As a matter of fact, that's why with the prophet Ezekiel, he says the very thing. He says that you didn't go in the wilderness to learn about sacrifices and burnt offerings. That wasn't what that was about. It was about doing teshuvah and obeying. And that's the point we find what Mashiach actually was pointing at, is the fact that the goal of everything in the Torah is really to obey. It's not to go and bring a sin sacrifice to the temple. It's not going to, let's just bring some new offering and stuff here. It was to do the teshuvah. It was to do what was righteous and what's holy. And that his pointing to her that the hour is coming, and now is, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. What did that mean, to worship the Father in spirit and truth? Isaiah the prophet tells us exactly what that means. And we see it's exactly what Mashiach Yehoshua was talking about. He says, those who abide in the Torah and the commandments and the statutes walk in the Spirit. That's what it means to walk in the Spirit and truth. Because when you keep the Torah, when you're keeping the commandments, you are walking in the Spirit. And that is the true signature of the Ruach HaKodesh abiding in our hearts. That's why when we see, for example, even in Acts chapter, I think it's chapter 6, the same thing is even argued when Peter is standing before the Sanhedrin and he's rebuking the people, and they get very angry at him because of the statement that he makes. And the statement he points out is he's talking about the fact that we know that he who has the Spirit of God, this is Acts chapter 5, okay? Acts chapter 5, verse 32. And we are witnesses of these things, and also is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. That's why we know, here's the Talmudim professing that walking in the Spirit means to walk in obedience. And here, when Mashiach Yehoshua says that to seek the worship the Father is to walk in spirit and truth, means to walk in obedience. He says God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. This is totally Isaiah. This is why Yeshayahu is so important to understand. And then going back and reading what he says here to realize that's exactly what Yehoshua quoted. He was quoting Yeshayahu in the sense of walking in the Spirit means to walk in obedience to the Torah. Then he goes and says, the woman said to him, I know that the Mashiach is coming, who's, obviously they translate once again, who's called the Messiah, which obviously doesn't need to be mentioned if you're reading Hebrew, right? So this is obviously, we're talking about a translation of a translation, right? Then it says, when he comes, he will tell us all things. Well, so that means that she knew that when Mashiach was going to come, right? That her understanding of the coming of Mashiach was he was supposed to reveal all the things of the Torah and to regather the people back into understanding the correct and full understanding of the Torah. So Yehoshua says there, I who speaks to you am. So meaning Mashiach Yehoshua says that very thing, points very factly that she is then told that he is the one. And that when she sees this, her eyes immediately are just opened. And it says, at this point, his Talmudim came, and they marveled that he talked with a woman. Yet no one said, what do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? The woman then left in her water pot, and went her way into the city, and said to the men, come, see a man who told me all the things I've ever did. Could this be the Mashiach? Then they went out to the city and came to him. In the meantime, his Talmudim urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat, of which you do not know. Therefore the Talmudim said to one another, has anything been brought to him, or anything to eat? Yehoshua said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work. Do you not say, there are still 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes, and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. And he who reaps receives wages, and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he and who sows, and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for that which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him, because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all that I ever did. Now notice this, they believed in him because of what? Not because of what he said, not because of what he was doing, only because they were caught up in the fact that he told me the future about my life. He told me about the past, about my life. He told me about what happened, okay? And it says here, so when the Samaritans had come to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his own word. Now this is the thing that's different. It says many more believed because of his own word. So they accepted him because of what he said. They accepted him because of what it was that he spoke and what he was teaching. Then they said to the woman, now we believe, not because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Mashiach, the Savior of the world. So, we have to see the point of view of the fact that some obviously listened to what she said and believed just from hearing her that she was basically convicted in her life about things that she'd done in her life. And that and what she said about him, about what she talked about the experience, it convinced them that the Mashiach had come, because they knew of the things of what the Bible said would be spoken of and what would be done in a relationship. But knowing the fact that when it says that they heard his words, that he spoke himself, and they were convinced themselves because of what they listened, this goes to show you, this is what causes people to believe, is when they read the Brit Chadashah for themselves. And they read the words that the Brit Chadashah says because they see it, it's real, it's true. All of these different things are proven right here. This is an actual fact. This is the truth. Now after those 2 days, he departed from there and went to Galilee. For Yehoshua himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Now what does it mean a prophet has no honor in his own country? Well, people very much discredit people who are related to a prophet or have a prophet in their city or country that they know of and stuff, because they look at the person as like, oh, that's just Bob, or that's just Chaim, or that's just Yonah, right? That's how they look at it, because the attitude of the people is they presume how they view the things that they view. And you got to think about it. The funny thing about with Mashiach Yehoshua is he would have been seen as very different. First off, Mashiach's keeping the Torah perfectly all the time. Well, how does that perception of the Torah being kept perfectly all the time look like to the eye of a sinner? It looks like this guy does weird things. That's what you would think. As a sinner, you would think this guy does very strange things. He does very awkward things. I don't know why he did that. And you would start probably justifying many, many things as, oh, he's not doing this right, or oh, he's not doing that right, or oh, he's just on his own program. Because why? Because the sinful thoughts would be perverting the reality of what a truthful action is being done. And this is exactly why and stuff, he even says that a prophet is not received in his own family, his own country, right? Because the way people perceive what's happened, do they really know what's going on in the journey? Do the people really know what Moshe had been through? Do the people really know what Yosef had gone through, what God was doing with him, or about what God did with Yaakov? Look at the brothers and how they perceived Yosef. They degraded him in their eyes. They looked at Yosef as, oh, that's Yosef. He's always saying things. He's always on his own crazy ideas and stuff. Because the truth opposes sin. And the truth stands alone by itself. And it's going to be seen as an outsider because it will stand by itself on its own. It will not defend itself. It is the truth. The truth is just the truth. And so it goes on to say here, it says that, so when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they also had gone to the feast. So Yehoshua came again to the Caesarea in Galilee, or Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine, and there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he had heard that Yehoshua came to Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then Yehoshua said to him, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. Now this is a sad thing, because you see, the context of it is, a lot of times people, they don't want to listen to the teaching. They don't want to listen to the words. They don't want to hear the stuff that's being said. They want to see signs and wonders. They want to see a miracle. They want to see some kind of amazing event. Oh, if I can see this, then I'll believe. And that's exactly what shows us the fact that what did Mashiach rebuke? He says he rebukes people who want to see signs and wonders. Because why? Because how does that really create faith? If you're just always looking for the sign and wonder, how does that really create faith? Faith is by believing that it's true, even when you don't see it. Faith is believing it will happen even when you have no proof in front of you right now that it's going to take place. But then when it does, what is your faith built upon? The fact that you believe in very much the things that you know to be true. When God tells us something will happen, it will happen despite whether or not we see it at the moment. Our faith in holding on to it when everything doesn't look like it would happen is what causes our faith to be proven that it's serious, real, and true, because we held on to it when there was no sign of it. And that is what we're to do. Believe in the facts. The very thing that these people wanted signs and wonders, rather than just hearing the truth and being converted by the very teachings, shows the differentiation between why some people, they say they come to believe, but really it's because of signs and wonders, not because they're listening to the actual truth. We need to listen to what the truth is, because it's the truth that converts the heart. I'll see you next time.